Everyone. I've talked at West Point and other colleges, military colleges, in the last few years, and the teachers there and the officers there say, be aware, everyone here is a volunteer, and everyone who's volunteered this year has known that they're going to be deployed by next year when they volunteered, which hasn't been the case most years since the Second World War. People could go to West Point with no idea they'd ever hear a shot fired in anger. All these young people signed up knowing that was true.
But I suppose when you learn about the recruitment process in America and the recruiting sergeants who hang around the shopping malls and
can't force anyone,
who work in often cities where there's enormous economic dispossession and poverty, and people don't feel that they've got any other option than to sign up.
No, it's not. I just think that's another boo-hoo point.
Okay.
You can't make them join.
Christopher Hitchens.
And by the way, people can come for that reason and say, I'd like to join. They can be told no. Certainly would be told no by the US Marines. We're not taking you for that reason. Don't be silly. I think there has been, at the reservist level, though, I should say this, in case you think I'm just being too gung-ho, there has been a decline in the standard. And, for example, a lot of the people who we found acting as sort of career sadists in Abu Ghraib prison, for example, are people who are reservists, who weren't even looking for information. They just liked, maltreating people, who'd had bad records in the prison system in the United States already, and people who shouldn't have been ever given any power over everybody. And I agree that is worrying.
There are others.
We don't want the armed forces to become a vacuum for psychos.
But on the other hand, some people say that to blame the low-level soldiers at Abu Ghraib for what happened is a mistake, that really it was following a line of command in which torture was approved of at the very highest level, at the vice presidential level in America.
I know that argument very well, but in this case it isn't true, because they weren't looking for information. They weren't involved in interrogation. They were just doing after-hours recreational torture of people who they happened to have under their control.
Christopher Hitchens is with us just recently on Radio National as one of your programs which dealt with the axis of evil countries, and obviously we've talked about Iraq a little already. You're very interesting on North Korea as well. Tell us about what you think is going to happen there and how much of a threat to the rest of the world it is.
Well, the problem with North Korea is that it has us all hostage. I mean, first it has its own people as slaves. Everyone. I've been in North Korea. I failed in my articles to describe how terrible it is to be in North Korea and to be completely state property all the time, to be told to worship a supreme leader all the time. It used to be at least they would feed you and give you a job in return for keeping you in this hermetic kingdom.
But it's poverty as well, isn't it?
Well, starvation, actually. I mean, they've lost, we think, at least 2 million people out of starvation. No, I should perhaps not say at least. At most, probably at least 1.25 million out of starvation. The best statistic, though, and this is for sure, is that a North Korean is now 5 or 6 inches shorter than a South Korean. That's over a few generations. That means fantastic maltreatment. It means the stunting of millions and millions of children, intelligence, physicality, everything. A nightmare. Slaves who aren't fed. They demand that we feed them instead. And they say if we don't, they won't negotiate on their nuclear weapons. So that's twice by the short and curlies, if you excuse the expression. And a terrible insult, but we feel we don't want to be responsible for the starvation, and we don't want them doing anything crazy with their weapons. And then third, they say with even their conventional weapons, they can destroy the capital city of South Korea, Seoul, which is very near the border. And now at last, after a long struggle, is also the capital of a democracy. So everything we do is under the disgusting threat and humiliation of blackmail from a regime that's imploding and might be still more irrational.
So what do we do? What do we do about it?
Well, there are people, including Mr. Perry, Mr. Clinton's former defense secretary, who don't think that the North Koreans, actually would make good on their threats. But I wouldn't want to be the president making that decision, I have to say. In other words, we could disarm them forcibly in an afternoon. I mean, they're presently in a state of extreme weakness. They only have an embryonic capacity to say, we'll take it out. The fear is they would saturate South Korea with fire and explosive the next day. There are experts who argue that they wouldn't. As I say, I'm so glad not to be, and I bet you're glad too that I'm not the president making that call.
We've found a limit to your gung-ho-dom.
Yeah, well, I think that would be a nasty one, but we shouldn't call it by any other name than it is. This is not negotiation we're having with them. This is absolutely humiliatingly being extorted under blackmail into the maintenance, among other things, by us among other people, of a terrible system of slavery and starvation that shames the entire world. I don't think our quarrel with North Korea, in other words, should be thought of as just one over weapons. It's a question of human rights. We ought to say, Korea can't stay, as Lincoln said about the United States, for long, half slave and half free. We can't make ourselves accomplices in a slave system.
Christopher Hitchens is with us. Let me ask you one final question and go back to
By the way, a religious slave system. It's a theocracy.
I want to go back to religion.
It's all based on the worship of a divine individual.
I want, you are, as I said at the beginning, a muscular anti-theist at the moment in what you're saying. People within the West, not people in perhaps the Islamic world, but Christians within the West might have a right to feel that they are the beleaguered minority at the moment. I notice even in this program that you're speaking in the concert hall to 2,000 people. Cardinal George Pell is speaking the next day in the tiny studio to 200 people. Maybe they're a minority that needs protecting rather than another boot up the arse.
The good Cardinal Archbishop has, I would imagine, a fairly large building somewhere in Sydney. Is it completely without taxpayer support, or is it just supported by the?
Well, it's certainly built on public land.
Yeah, he can. He probably gets the tax break. I don't know, but he's able to pull any crowd he wants. And I don't know. Maybe that's all he gets. I'm sure he can do better. I mean, my sales, as you can well imagine, as with the sales of God is not great at all fine bookstores, are determined by the enthusiasm of the ticket holders. I don't just get a hall to speak in. They decide the hall by the number of people who buy tickets.
Let me put it another way.
I wish the Cardinal and I were on the same platform. I'd love to debate him. But I won't hear from him that he's a member of a victimized minority.
In the West, though, is he the big problem, or is materialism the big problem? Is the Catholic Church the enemy, or is a secularism which is so totally devoid of values that it ends up with people basically worshipping McDonald's and Nike? Is that a bigger problem? Is a lack of spirituality a bigger problem than a spiritual impulse?
Okay, that's a lot of questions in one. But one, I would say the Catholic Church is a very materialist organisation, and it's certainly very much part of the material world. I understand what's meant by the aridity of certain kinds of secularism and atheism, of course, and I don't care for the McDonald's culture myself, but I don't go around saying that, for example, AIDS is quite a bad thing, but condoms are much worse in Africa. I mean, I don't end up with a morally fatuous position like that. I don't do what His Holiness the Pope has done, for example, and just recently readmit to the Church Bishop Roger Williams and a whole number of other Jew-baiting, Holocaust-denying, fascist-sympathizing, some Mel Gibsonite creeps who were quite rightly thrown out of the church a long time ago to this present Pope, and presumably to his Cardinal Archbishop in Australia. It's more important to reconcile with outright fascists than to have a deal on, say, contraception. Now, this is ridiculous. It's morally grotesque. And the alternative to it is not McDonald's. The alternative to it is Voltaire, Jefferson, Thomas Paine, Spinoza, Albert Einstein. This is not a moral wilderness. How dare they say it is?
Christopher Hitchens, very nice to see you today. Thank you so much for your time.
No, it's very generous of you.
Christopher Hitchens is the author, most recently, of God Is Not Great. He's also giving the main lecture, the opening address at the Opera House's Festival of Dangerous Ideas this Saturday night. I don't know if tickets are still available, but I'm sure if you bring the Opera House, they'll tell you. You might even choose to go to the other one at the smaller